Welcome to this DDi CADcast. My name is Quentin Rock, and today we'll cover the enhancements in SolidWorks 2014 to the configuration functionality. So let's get started. The first enhancement to take a look at in configurations is the additional properties for toolbox components. As you can see by the slide, the properties are part name, standard, and specification, and those are actually in some of the toolbox files already. Not all standards have that. You can see I put an asterisk to show some of the standards that do have those specifications. But let's jump into SolidWorks and take a look at what I'm talking about here. If I go to the Toolbox Configure tool and take a look at the standards themselves, you'll notice I'm just going to jump down into ANSI Inch, for example, and notice the different properties here, the different items that we have on this list. Now if I jump to a different standard, let's jump into ISO, another popular standard here. You'll notice that I do have those part name, specification, and standard fields inside here. So now in 2014 you're able to reference those in things like bill of materials. So I'll just show you in this particular example. I already have a few bolts in here from the ISO standard. So if I insert a bill of materials, whether you do this in the drawing or on the 3D level, you'll notice that I now can add, and let's zoom in here, a column, and I have the option here to select toolbox property. If I select that, you'll see those three standards, or those three properties: part name, specification, and standard. So it's a small enhancement. It's just the ability to reference that toolbox information that's already in the toolbox components inside a bill of materials. The next enhancement to take a look at in configurations is applying configurations to equations. And what they've done is really enhance this interface. So you can now configure equations and global variables in the same way you configure dimensions. Previously, you could only configure equations and global variables by suppressing and unsuppressing them in different select configurations. So you had to add a lot of extra equations that were suppressed in all the other configs, but not this config, to control the same value or the same dimension in different configurations. So we'll jump into SolidWorks and see how that works. I've just set this up already. I have a weldment part here that I want to have a rectangular and a square configuration. But in the square configuration, I want to build a little intelligence. That way, if I ever have to change the size of this, it'll always remain perfectly square. So what I'll do is I'll take one of these dimensions and I'll say equals the other dimension. You'll notice right away I get this option for this configuration, all configurations, or specified configurations. So now I can apply that intelligence. Let's take a look at the equations editor here, or the manager, and we'll see that the square configuration does in fact have this. I can only delete. So in prior versions, in 2013 and prior, you'll see that you would have had suppress or unsuppress inside here. And that's how you would have controlled it. I would have had to gone back over to the rectangular config, suppressed it in the rectangular config, but not in the square configuration. And you'll notice when I switch over to that rectangular configuration, it's already suppressed. It's already gone. So I no longer need to suppress or unsuppress between configurations or add multiple configurations or add multiple equations to control each configuration. The other really cool thing is I'm able to configure global variables. So I can actually have it be this configuration, all configurations, or specified configurations. And you'll notice I have it set to 3 meters for an overall height. If I switch over to the square one, you'll see that I have it to 80 using the document's units. So you can actually have units be different inside these equations as well. So kind of some really nice enhancements to how equations work. A little less work, they work just like configuring a regular dimension. You can now configure the equations. While we're in this box, I just want to point out that there is a filter now for sketch equations. So if you just want to see the equations on the sketch level and not the feature level or the global variables, you can filter those out as well. One last thing to mention: I showed that you can no longer suppress or unsuppress equations between different configurations. You just don't use them in other configurations. if you cannot use configurable equations and suppress and unsuppress in the same model. So if you created a model in SolidWorks 2013 or an earlier version, you must remove all the suppressed and unsuppressed equations and global variables before adding configurable equations and global variables. So unfortunately, it won't just convert over. You do have to remove all that suppress and unsuppress out of your 2013 and prior parts if you're going to use the new functionality in 2014. Our final enhancement to configurations is selecting configurations from the context toolbar. And it is just like it sounds. It's a small little enhancement, but it's a very powerful one and a very useful one. If we jump into SolidWorks and take a look at what I'm talking about, if you select any component, you get the context menu here. You'll now have the ability to switch configurations straight from this context menu. So no longer do you have to go through and go to the properties of each component and switch configurations. You can just do it on the fly. That also works for things like selecting subassembly. You'll see you now get the options if there's configurations of the subassembly. If there are not configurations, you will not get that pop-up toolbar. So the software is smart enough to know that there isn't configurations and not give you options to select them if they're not there. That's the last enhancement to configurations. Well, that wraps up this CADcast. For more CADcast topics, check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/DDi CAD or our tech blog at ddicad.com/techcenter. Thanks for watching.